Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael, and I am building a 1960s market scene as part of High Street behind my N-gauge viaduct. I've completed a flat back scene which represents the rear of High Street. I've tried to represent distance by using a smaller scale and faded colours for the buildings. And it's not completely flat. I've used layers of card to introduce just enough depth to fool the eye into seeing depth that isn't really there. But does it work? Let's find out. Here's a look at making a layered street in the distance. I recorded this in Leeds last week, and it really captures well the look I'm going for. Layers and layers of buildings, different ages, different styles, all flat against the sky in the distance. I used Google Earth and the Bradford Council Planning Portal to help me choose a selection of buildings that had the look I was going for. I used the free drawing application Inkscape to draw the basic outlines of the tall buildings that would become the back of High Street. I printed the street onto basic copier paper and I used blue tack to hold it in place on the back scene. I printed the street at various different sizes until I got the one that seemed about right. This one was too small and too low. This one was a bit better, but still too small and too low. This one's better, and it seems to blend in well enough. It's still too low though. I spent time in Inkscape working out how the buildings could fit together as a series of layers. Each layer would sit on top of the layer behind it. I settled on 8 separate layers. Each layer was printed as a simple outline onto an A4 sticky label. I decided that each layer would be made from 0.5mm card. I simply stuck the labels onto the card and then used my scalpel to cut each component out. I was left with a stack of card 8 layers deep, but it already had a pleasing 3D look to it, despite being less than a centimetre deep. I applied textures to each layer in Inkscape. This involved the basic wall material, as well as basic lintels, sills and downspouts. I wasn't very accurate here, I just slapped them on, as they will barely be visible. I overlaid each layer with a semi-transparent pale blue rectangle. This had the effect of removing some of the colour saturation from the layer. I reduced the opacity for each layer, which made the layers closer to the front a darker colour. The effect is subtle, but I hope that it helps increase the sense of depth on the finished model. I printed the textures to my usual photo paper and I set about cutting and sticking. I used my normal PVA glue for this. Each of the 44 window apertures I cut will be wrapped with texture to hide the exposed card edges, and will look something like this. At this point, it dawned on me that these 0.5mm deep window apertures would be something like 0.5 metre or more deep at the small scale I was working in. I also thought that the extra depth of the acetate windows would cause me problems, and the overly shiny acetate may also spoil the effective distance that I was trying to achieve. So I decided not to use them. I went back to Inkscape and I drew each individual window in place on the drawing. I then added a circular graduated fill from white to black to give the impression of light reflecting in the windows of the whole street. I printed this and stuck each part over the holes I had so patiently cut out earlier. I then cut each piece of texture from the photo paper with holes for the windows. I used watercolour paints to very carefully colour the white edges of the paper. Working from behind, I ensured I got no paint on the printed front. This is then stuck on top of the windows. The single layer of paper gives just enough hint of 3D to be worth it. I slowly built up each layer using PVA glue to stick one on top of the other. I wrapped texture around the chimney stacks, and some components had an extra flap to wrap around more than one layer. Eventually, I ended up with a completed model which more or less matched what I was trying to achieve. All of the exposed edges were painted in watercolour. The chimney pots were just painted onto the card, and they are wonky enough to match the others on the layout. I used blue tack to help me work out the best placement. I lived with it for a while to be sure I was doing the right thing, and eventually used Oohoo glue to stick it onto the back scene. So, does it work? Well, these things are never perfect. You can never make something that is only 1 centimetre look like it is many centimetres deep. But on the whole, yes, I think it does. I mean, you'll never look at it up close like this. Once the market and its tower is in place, it will be an overlooked backdrop, and in that role I think it works really well. Walking into the room and looking at the viaduct, my mind does not really see the street. It becomes background patina, the merest hint of an urban landscape behind what we are actually looking at. The pale colours really do work when seen against the dark stone of the viaduct and the rich, deep stonework at the end of Market Street. The varied shading of the glass also seems to work. It's just printed paper, but you initially think you really are looking at a pale patch of sky being reflected in the street. I would maybe have made it better by including shadows on the recessed parts of the street or changing the patterns in the windows. But that's maybe a job for Chandwell version 2. I'm going to start to make the market next, I think. Here's a look at my plans for it. And please do me a favour. It really helps my channel if you'd press the thumbs up button under the video. It's free to do, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd do it for me. Until next time then, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.